This week on The Futurists.
In 30 years' time or 50 years' time, doesn't matter, we will have guaranteed swarms of smart robots extracting...
is going to destroy the economics of the current world system, right?
Extracting very valuable resources in the asteroid belt. So I don't know if at the time Bitcoin is going to be dominating. I don't know if blockchain is going to be viable. So as those robots coordinate and allocate energy and propellant and bandwidth and communication and other resources amongst them by the millions, if not the billions, are they going to use wire transfers, credit cards? Are they going to write paper checks to each other?
Exactly. Welcome back to The Futurists. I'm joined by Rob Tercek and I'm Brett King. We are the hosts of this relatively new show. We hit a milestone last week, Rob, which is we became the second largest podcast for the Provoke Media Network. So that's
yes,
cool, right? So
right on.
Yeah, no, it's getting some great traction. So thanks everybody for your incredible support. And we have a very cerebral, a guest, a friend of both Robert and I over many years. I'm really excited to have him on because we always have really engaging conversations and he challenges thinking, and that is David Orban. He is the managing advisor of Beyond Enterprises. You may know him from the work he's done as the founder of the Network Society Research Global Think Tank, and also he was faculty and advisor at Singularity University. He's joining us from somewhere in northern Italy. David Orban, welcome to The Futurists.
Thank you, Brett. Thank you, Robert.
It's great to see you again, David.
Yeah, so let me kick this off with a fairly simple one. You don't necessarily label yourself as a futurist, even though you clearly do work in that space. But when was it that you first realized you wanted to be involved in building the future and advising on the future, and what took you down that path?
The way I express myself about this is that we are all time travelers. 1 minute per minute, we are going to get to a place we call future. And similarly to how we choose the path on a train or a car, when we look at a map, there is a map of the future where the contours of that place are becoming sharper as we get closer. And we have the power of shaping that future. And I knew that I wanted us to improve this power, improve our ability to yield it and to wield it in order to make sure that the place when we get there is one we enjoy, that enables us to thrive. This was really at the very beginning of my independent life, if you wish. Already 30, 40 years ago, when I would be at dinner with someone, one of my favorite questions towards the closing of the dinner, when the other person would be sufficiently drunk, is, okay, what is your 30-year plan? And very few people would have an answer. Now, at the time I did, of course, and I still do. And since I said that this started 30, 40 years ago, one of the questions you may ask further in this conversation, hey, what was your plan, and was it completed in the meantime? So we will potentially go there. But I believe that we have the opportunity to really be active about how our life is unfolding, and as a consequence, cumulatively, humanity has the power to intervene and make sure that we are happy about the outcome of our cumulative actions, what we do together in this world.
I mean, this is a common theme that I think we're finding. Rob, you can let me know your thoughts on this as well. But, a lot of people talk about the fact that, at a governmental or a governance level, policy is really critical to ensure that we have a good future, but also that collectively we, philosophically, humanity is going to need to come together more in the future. And I'm not talking about globalization necessarily as much as is a philosophical understanding of where humanity fits in the future, combined with artificial intelligence and how we respond to climate and, ongoing issues with pandemics and, inequality and all of these hot buttons, getting consensus on this. We had Brad Templeton on a few weeks ago, and he was talking about the stewards versus the keens. People keen on the future and the stewards of history, and the fact that technology always seems to win, and it creates this friction against people who are very traditional in their viewpoint. But getting consensus about where we go to in the future is often a really difficult thing. So, have you got any thoughts on that in terms of how we can be better at getting people to come together in terms of the future vision of humanity?
Daniel Dennett, a wonderful philosopher whose books are suspiciously easy to read, nonetheless, in my opinion, contain some of the deepest ideas in a manner that is reliably solid and valuable, wrote a book called Freedom Evolves. And in that book, he talks about many things, amongst them how evolution improves in time as well, and how the emergent phenomena, including free will, according to his worldview, become viable from substrates that apparently include them as a potential, but looking at the substrate itself is hard to understand what those possibilities are. And all of Dennett's writing has been very influential on my thinking, especially the ideas in this book. And I feel that we are able of creating infrastructure that is then the basis for a better understanding of the world, both from the point of view of science and technology, but also from the point of view of policy and social organization. When more than 10 years ago I started talking about the concept of network society, the starting point there was that contrary to what most people feel, it is not society that is shaping and dictating scientific and technological policy, for example, allocating research dollars and then deciding what results to adopt and what results to discard or shy away from, but that it is...
There's not a lot of scientific method to policy. Well,
there is a lot of hubris in policymakers believing that they have the answers. They are in an unenviable position because whether they are elected or appointed, they are supposed to have the answers. It is very hard for a policymaker to say, let's have a lean, agile approach. Make 1,000 mistakes, and I'm sure that we will find actually what works. They would be fired very rapidly, right? So what in reality happens is that you have technologies that are improving and making a given social organization possible. It wasn't a problem how to reach global consensus 500 years ago, because communication was so slow that by the time one continent was in sync with what another continent was thinking or desiring or aiming for, well, everything would have been completely different again. The heartbeat of the planet in terms of what human society needed or wanted couldn't be in sync.
Yeah.
But do you really think that's the case today? I mean, look, today you look around the world, you've got a war in the Ukraine where, basically an oil oligarch has invaded the sovereign nation next door and is bombarding cities in the most brutal fashion. In the United States, where I live, we have one political party that seems to be hell-bent on dismantling the federal government and violating every norm of policymaking in the process. So as I look around the world, I am having a tough time finding the optimism when I hear you talk about global consensus or consensus even between two continents. Right now, it seems like we're fragmenting into more polarization and more conflict. Do you see it differently?
Both of those are examples of what I'm saying, because the war in Ukraine or the moral panic around certain things in the U.S. reverberate around the planet almost instantaneously. There are many international bodies that predict food shortages, if not even famine, as a consequence of the war in Ukraine. There are conversations around the role of gender and pronouns and very American topics in countries like Italy, for example, where language is inherently sexist. A table is male or female in Italy, right? How can you not be sexist in your language when every noun is either male or female? With contradictions too, because one hand is male, two hands are female. Crazy.
I won't even ask why that is.
And then I wouldn't be able to answer. But
I have a Spanish friend who said if there's a room of women that are talking, then there's one way to describe it. As soon as a man joins the room, the gender of the entire room changes.
Oh yeah.
And so he said, this gender issue you're grappling with in the United States, it gets intractably more difficult in other languages. So I can appreciate that concept. But tell me, are you optimistic as you hear about these things? It sounds like all we're doing is uncovering more ways to find conflict and more ways to disagree.
Being an optimist or a pessimist, I think, is not something that someone chooses. Someone is. I am an optimist, and as a consequence, I see the world with those lens. I have great friends who are not by choice, just by their nature, are pessimists and see the world through their lens. Now, after the fact, we then tend to select and find ways to justify our positions. That is why websites like Our World in Data are so useful and valuable, because they try to assemble data sets that can objectively illustrate whether certain conditions globally are improving or not. Another one is Gapminder. And both of these illustrate in beautiful visual dynamic representations that indeed, thanks to technology, human condition has been improving for the past
we've certainly eliminated extreme poverty in most cases. China has obviously done very well at that. But let's get back to the process. as a futurist. And let me just start before we get into how, what is your methodology. In terms of your track record, you've made big bets. You made bets on crypto and blockchain and other stuff very early in the process on the network solution side of things. What is it that you count as some of your more successful bets in the past in respect to the future that evolved?
I like trends that cannot prove me wrong because they are long enough.
That's my joke about what is the definition of a futurist, right? It's never being wrong today.
That's right. Or being luckily dead by the time you could be wrong. So I have been teaching Cisco what is the Internet of Things at the beginning of the century, right? And they were very excited and then adopted the Internet of Everything slogan. Now, I'm not saying thanks to what I have been telling them, but their thinking and my thinking about how the interconnectivity of our physical world is going to increase by many, many orders of magnitude is similar and still unfolding. I have been talking about conversational interfaces and how artificial intelligence is going to enable a new way of interacting with our digital world. And I am very excited about how today we are not only starting to speak to smart speakers as a matter of fact, wherever they are, and for some of us, it is a daily happenstance for things just waking up, ready to decipher what we are saying with their little icons on the devices or the ring lights in a given color on the speaker themselves. But we have been just very recently witnessing the emergence of an entire new profession that people start to call prompt engineering, where the foggy understanding, even by their creators, of the abilities and capabilities of massive neural networks is probed and mapped through natural language interaction
when
is
do
bringing
you
out unexpected results.
When do you remember the first conversations on neural networks?
1988, 1989.
That was very early in the process. Yeah. We were still largely expert systems back then, right?
Well, yes, because there was some mathematical misunderstanding about how backpropagation could converge. And it was believed that as you increased the size of the networks, the problems would become either intractable or the system would just not converge and would not yield anything usable. That was luckily resolved, the mathematical misunderstanding, as well as, of course, the power of the hardware dramatically increased thanks to Moore's law, and here we are. We have huge amounts of data on powerful hardware with algorithms that themselves are very, very effective. That is why there is the renaissance of bottom-up approaches versus the top-down that dominated 3-4 decades ago.
Is there anyone, you've mentioned a lot of different authors already today, but is there anyone in particular that really inspired you, that captured your imagination in those days? You know, back in the sort of the foundational times of the internet and in the Internet of Things?
Science fiction of all kinds and all authors. As we are recording this, there's a full shelf of books behind me, and in front of me there are all the paperbacks with David Brin and Neil Stephenson and Greg Egan and Isaac Asimov, of course, and all of those wonderful books full of ideas that have driven a lot of invention and innovation, because they have been inspirational for those doers that turn ideas into tangible reality as those ideas become embodied in what is possible at any given time.
We've had several good conversations with science fiction authors, and it looks like we're going to have a couple of others. Some of the folks you mentioned.
In fact, David's coming on. We hopefully will get Neil Stevenson on, but David Brin's definitely coming on soon. So, and
inspiration's a big part of it. You know, like you need the inspiration. I think many researchers and technologists toil in obscurity and sometimes in isolation. And so you need a good idea of what you're working on and what you're working towards, because those results might not show up next year or even a couple of years later. So that science fiction can be very inspiring for people in almost a religious context. And speaking of religious context, I want to talk to you a little bit about the singularity and maybe Silicon Valley's irrational faith in the accelerating technologies. But we should do that after the break. I think right now it's time for us to go to a break. So we're going to take a few minutes break here. You are listening to The Futurists. I'm Robert Tercek, and my co-host is Brett King. Our guest today is David Orban. Orban is a longtime friend of both of ours, someone we've known for years and years. He's been at the forefront of emerging technology now for, gosh, how long, David? 20, 30 years, as long as I've known you. So we will be taking a short break here. Stay tuned, and we'll be right back, and we'll continue with David Orban.
Welcome to Breaking Banks, the #1 global fintech radio show and podcast. I'm Brett King.
And I'm Jason Henricks. Every week since 2013, we explore the personalities, startups, innovators, and industry players driving disruption in financial services.
From incumbents to unicorns, and from cutting-edge technology to the people using it to help create a more innovative, inclusive, and healthy financial future. I'm JP Nichols, and this is Breaking Banks.
We're back with The Futurists. I'm Brett King, your host, co-hosting with Rob Tercek. I'm in Bangkok this week. Rob is in Eindhoven. We are enjoying being offshore. How was your 4th of July offshore, Robert? Did you do anything?
It's fine, but you know, the one thing that's happening here, again, this COVID outbreak is starting to happen, so everyone's getting a little bit paranoid, going back for the masks and so on. Right before the break, I was joking around a little bit about the singularity, because I think some aspects of the singularity, this notion that at some point in the future, $1,000 of computing equipment will exceed human brain capacity, and then the next step will be that it'll greatly exceed it by many multiples, because the technology is improving so fast. And at that point, it's predicted by Ray Kurzweil and others that we will reach what is known as a singularity, a turning point such that everything we've known up to that point will no longer apply. There'll be such a tremendous change. And while that's a fascinating concept, and by the way, The Singularity is Near still is an excellent read, even though the book's more than 10 years old at this point. Some people have taken it very, very literally. There's actually a Church of the Singularity in Silicon Valley. And so, David, I know that you've been involved in Singularity University. This is a place where I studied 10 years ago and enjoyed myself tremendously. They focus on the exponential technologies, or what's sometimes called the accelerating technologies. These are the technologies that are following that curve, that exponential growth curve, where at the very beginning, it's hard to detect much improvement. And then suddenly you get to the knee in the curve, and then it takes off and it starts to chart up, straight up on the chart. We were now in the knee of that curve with artificial intelligence, something David was talking about just before the break. But David, I'd love to tease you a little bit about singularity. So tell me, am I right? Is it a religion, or is there some merit to the concept?
If it is a religion, I'm an absolute churchgoer, and I am happy to be proud of it, to the point that I think we are already in the singularity. When you are circling a black hole, you have a hard time realizing that you have crossed the event horizon. My definition of singularity is maybe less quantitative than Ray's, but that is why if you look at my definition and its consequences, you may end up saying, we are already in it. Because what I talk about is the limits of adaptability of individuals, the technological ways to push the limits of this adaptability, and some people who potentially throw in the towel because they renounce those tools, and as a consequence, they voluntarily and definitively stay behind. They leave.
And we see that right now in the EU. The European Union has been struggling to define a way to regulate artificial intelligence for years. I've talked to a couple of EU ministers about that, and now they're trying to they have sort of a shopping list of artificial intelligence technologies that they'd like to apply regulation to. I look at that and say, gosh, the Americans are going to love this, and the Chinese as well, because it means the Europeans are just getting off the playing field. They're not going to compete. What's your take on that, David?
But I think China has taken a heavier hand in terms of regulation of AI more recently. The biggest problem is in the US is AI is running rampant right now. There's 600 federal databases with facial recognition on them. You've got the Facebook, Cambridge Analytica thing, behavioral modification attempts and things like that. It's clear that some sort of regulation is needed in the US. If anything, I think China's probably got a more mature view of this, but which we always thought the singularity would come out of the States, out of US-based tech companies. But
to respond to Robert, the EU believes that you can innovate by regulation. We do have, we have fintech, we have govtech, how to create better ways to govern, and we have regtech. But the EU definitely took the interpretation of regulatory technology and its implications too far, to the point that it can be absolutely harmful. The ascientific objection against genetically modified organisms, for example, led to the to African countries not buying golden rice, so-called golden rice, that has been enhanced through its ability to produce or include vitamin B. And this led to an unnecessary increase in blindness due to a vitamin deficiency, especially in children, that could have been avoided were it not for this anti-scientific stance from the EU.
So now you sound like an American, David. You're talking like an American politician, talking about regulation working against the interest of the future of being anti-scientific. I spoke to a Finnish foreign minister recently who complained that the United States has outsourced tech regulation to the EU.
Yeah,
I thought that's a very clever way of looking at it.
That's a fair point, yeah.
Like we just
Yes.
aren't even attempting to regulate this stuff. The Europeans are struggling with it, and you're right.
But you know, once
Chinese
you
are top down imposing it
because of GDPR and you know all those sort of things, you know, you effectively, as an American company, you have to you know the European standard is what you end up encoding because
Yeah.
you know you have to be compliant with EU laws and you know, you can't really do what can you do operationally in the US that allows you free reign that you can't do in the EU as a global platform. It's very difficult to really code those differences because even a European citizen who comes to the States and is using the platform, you know, they're going to have a case with EU law, right? So
that's true. That's true. Yeah. Let me respond to David in a different way that builds on one of his other observations, which is that we might actually already be in the singularity. And one of the signposts for that, one of the things that it indicates that we're entering this phase of singularity, which is to say, a technological change that is moving at such a rapid pace that humanity cannot keep up. Well, one of the signs that might be happening is around the world, we're starting to see institutions break down, traditional institutions that have done very well, and institutions that have served us for 50 or 70 years are starting to fall apart. We're seeing a reactive response. Governments don't seem to be able to be on top of this. The conversation about regulation, although we're kidding a little bit here, we're joking a little bit, that's one illustration of it. Governments find themselves on the back foot. They can't keep abreast of or stay ahead of technological development. David, what's your perspective there? You have your own term you've coined for this. It's not accelerating technology, it's jolting technology.
That's right. The mathematical term for the first derivative of acceleration is the jolt. There is an alternative term as well. Jerk is the same, jolt or jerk. But when I thought about publishing these thoughts, I decided it was better to end up calling them jolting technologies rather than jerking technologies, which would have led to some misunderstandings of what I'm talking about. Jolting technologies are those where the rate of acceleration is increasing, and there are many. The simplest to illustrate is maybe a rocket where the propellant is consumed as the engine roars at full power, and as a consequence, the acceleration of the rocket is able to increase because the mass of the rocket is diminishing. Force is constant, mass is diminishing, and as a consequence, the acceleration is increasing, right? But
even in the past, the engines would actually get lighter because it would burn off the...
that is true as well,
the protective coating of the engine bell.
And the... examples are numerous. In quantum computing, for example, when you add qubits to the system, you are not merely increasing the power of the system at the rate of what you would expect in traditional computers, but with an increasing rate of acceleration. Artificial intelligence. Many people have been expecting a tapering off in the increase of the power of neural networks as the size of these networks increases, but it hasn't been happening. The contrary, the more you increase the sizes, and now we are talking about neural networks with not billions but trillions
of inputs.
Parameters. Their abilities start to include new things. A wonderful example I saw just a couple of weeks ago in the field of those systems that generate images based on the prompts you give them.
Yeah.
And one of the examples was a kangaroo standing in front of the Sydney Opera, holding a sign with written on artificial intelligence or something like that. And with just a few 100 million parameters, the network wasn't even able to draw a decent animal. With its full power, it was able to represent the scene perfectly, including the written element. And in the middle, it is very funny, so endearing, because maybe it gets the kangaroo right, but the opera house in the back is fishy. Right. The writing on the label, it looks like it's just coming up with something, but it doesn't know how to write really. Yeah. So all of these, from rockets to quantum computing to artificial intelligence and others, are examples of what I call jolting technologies, which are harder to decipher, harder to predict, harder to regulate. So it is not a surprise, Robert, as you said, that organizations are unable to cope, that organizations are breaking apart because their role of understanding and regulating, being on top of this, is completely eliminated.
In fact, many of the cycles in government are based on an agrarian economy from 150 years ago. The reason Americans still vote on Tuesdays is because that was market day, right? That was the day when farmers would come to town. They couldn't travel on Sunday because that was a day of church. So they would pack up their wagons on Monday and come into town on Tuesday. And that seemed to be the date that the U.S. government decided was the best day for voting. Now, today, in the 21st century, this is an absurdity. And other countries have been a little bit more nimble. They've been able to move their voting to the weekend, sometimes the entire weekend. Sometimes, like in Australia, it's a national holiday, so everybody can vote, even if you have to work. But yeah, you see examples of this everywhere you travel to, where governments seem to be caught in a reactive mode. They're unable to anticipate. They're not well informed. Many of the times, the people in government aren't really scientifically literate in a way where they can master these technologies. And so they rely on think tanks, they rely on advisors, and too often they rely on lobbyists who are going to pay their way to advising. I don't know if you come into any contact with those folks in your line of work, David, but it would be quite interesting, I think, to hear about your perspectives on the kind of advice that you give to clients, because you're an advisor. What do you tell companies today about the future, how to prepare for jolting technology?
What I love about our world today is that the barriers to entry for all of these technologies are disappearing. Do you want to experiment with space technology? You would think that requires billions of dollars. Not true. The European Space Agency is dying for individuals and companies to take advantage of the immense amount of Earth observation data that they are making available for free, including for commercial applications. They have an entire summer school that teaches you how to incorporate your ability of using space originating data in your corporate applications. Do you want to understand how quantum computers work? The platforms that Microsoft and Google and IBM make available let you play with quantum computers in order to understand how their logic is fundamentally different from the previous computing architectures. And of course, AI, where you can sign up and get access to GPT-3, which generates text for your marketing copy, or use DALL-E or Mid-Journey in order to create the illustrations for your next slide presentation, which is actually what I did a couple of days ago, where our excitedly threw out all the remaining stock photos that were lingering in my presentation, and in a few minutes, interactively and actually sharpening my
cool.
thinking
I
as
could
I
use
was
that,
doing it, I created the slides that I delivered in Seoul remotely.
So
and
these
let me tell you, they are beautiful.
The images were created by an AI.
That's right.
DALL-E.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
It is very powerful, not only because it represents the concepts that you want, but because you can add descriptors and
That's right.
styles that will represent those concepts.
So you could have
with
like
the
a
kind
theme,
of emotional
visually.
message, the theme, the
Yeah.
style that you want to convey.
That's awesome.
It could be like you can ask it to do the Game of Thrones pictures rendered in a style of Dr. Seuss. And as absurd as that sounds, people are doing this. You got to search it. DALL-E is an amazing tool. What's remarkable with DALL-E and GPT-3 is how good they got how so quickly. It's all in the last 18 months. Just 2 years ago, it was easy for copywriters at an ad agency or for screenwriters to dismiss artificial intelligence. People in the creative industry said AI will never displace us. Now it's quite evident that everybody in those industries.
The same thing about the internet, man. Internet advertising, it's never going to replace, print and TV.
It's not going to replace
the ad agency has
people.
been really bad at predicting the future. Actually,
that's true. But they're going to have to learn to work with these tools. And so just what we were just describing about DALL-E, where, some creative person is kind of directing it and collaborating with the AI. AI is a tool that accelerates the process. I think that's going to be likely in every creative industry in the very near future. Now, David, if we were having this conversation 18 months ago, you would have been for sure telling us about cryptocurrency, blockchain, Web3, and all these exciting things, because at that time, those fields were white hot and they were booming. It looked like the future at that point. But today, we're recording this in July of 2022, where the crypto market has been bad and getting worse month after month after month. This has been a terrible year, a major setback for cryptocurrency. And today, the newspapers are full of headlines talking about the crypto crash and how it's not the same as the dot-com crash in 2000. Now, I know you work a lot with the blockchain. Would you like to respond to what I just said? Would you like to tell us a little bit about what you're doing with the blockchain and tell us where we should be optimistic about blockchain or even crypto?
And I have a long-term perspective on things, and this is the third or fourth crypto winter that I'm weathering, right? And at Beyond Enterprises, we recommend our clients not to focus on the next week or next month, but really ask themselves what is the long-term value they can build. I am fully convinced that blockchain and Bitcoin are here to stay. I actually believe that the current downturn is healthy because it eliminates projects that do not have the staying power that is necessary, that are based exclusively on hype. We are working with a client based in India, and today there are about 10 million people using cryptocurrencies in India. Out of 1.4 billion people. And they really want to extend the reach of these tools. Now, the opportunity for growth is tremendous. And if we have another episode recording in a couple of years' time, I am sure that a lot of the projects such as the one that I am talking about will be here, and they will be on a good path towards giving value to an increasing number of people. hundreds of millions, and then billions.
Okay, but we've been hearing about that for 12 years now with respect to blockchain and cryptocurrency. Every time I talk to people in that field, they're like, oh, just wait. You're going to start to use Bitcoin or other kinds of currency to purchase real things in the real world. That hasn't happened. No one uses these currencies to buy anything in the real world. They might do it in the crypto domain.
Unless you're using the yuan, a central bank digital currency in China.
Sure, or if you're using it for money
Robert,
transfers, for remittances.
We were talking about the global heartbeat. If I came to you in 1978 and I told you the internet is going to be big, you would have told me, what are you talking about? If I came to you in 1988 and I told you the internet is going to be big, you would have told me, what are you talking about? If I came to you in 1998, you would have started hearing about the internet.
I was working full time on the internet by that point. So, yes, I would have been with you.
I'm not talking about you specifically, but people in general in the world. So the fact that the Bitcoin technology and blockchain has been around only for about a dozen years, and we have been hearing about it, and we are asking ourselves, is it delivering on its promise, is due to the fact that with the infrastructure we already have, the internet infrastructure, ideas can move around fast, that we can ask these questions rather than being in the dark about them. And we can explore alternatives, the central bank digital currencies, which are a next generation, extremely dangerous blockchain technology too.
This is where David and I probably differ with you on this, Rob, is that, David was one of the, I know we had the DAO guy on the other week. David was involved in it, right? David was involved in the original DAO, I just see crypto and tokens as the underlying mechanism of smart contracts, and that's inevitable. So there's no future where we don't have digital currency in terms of core operation of value exchange at a smart contract level. You either have CBDCs or tokens or crypto, right?
So the example I give is I have friends working on asteroid mining. And in 30 years' time or 50 years' time, doesn't matter, we will have guaranteed swarms of smart robots extracting
is going to destroy the economics of the current world system, right?
Extracting very valuable resources in the asteroid belt. So I don't know if at the time Bitcoin is going to be dominating. I don't know if blockchain is going to be viable. So as those robots coordinate and allocate energy and propellant and bandwidth and communication and other resources amongst them by the millions, if not the billions, are they, Robert, going to use wire transfers, credit cards? Are they going to write paper checks to each other?
Exactly.
Right? I don't care what you call the system that they are going to use, but it has to be something that is resilient enough so that when the coordination breaks down in an area, it can be rapidly and non-violently reconstituted when the communication becomes possible again.
So you're talking about now the advantage of decentralization. That's what you're referring in case the network is disrupted. For the record, look, I'm not anti-crypto. I'm long Bitcoin. I'm long Ethereum. I've been involved in these things since 2011. So I'm quite interested in this space. I'm supportive of DAOs and of autonomous organizations as well. So smart contracts are interesting to me. But I think it is a fair criticism to point out that at this stage, 12 years in, other technologies had achieved much broader and more widespread adoption. And I'm talking about internet technologies and web technologies in the 1990s, networking, e-commerce, and so forth. They had multi-billion-dollar businesses happening. Where today, the market for blockchain solutions for enterprise is less than $5 billion, and that's 12 years in. So we have to say that's not any way comparable to other network technologies that were adopted by enterprise. You're right. In the future, it might happen, and it's a mythical future where everything's robotized and robots are communicating with each other.
It is not
They'll need a way to transact.
Coincidence that I was mentioning the 70s. TCP/IP was developed in the 70s. We are now in the equivalent of the 70s, maybe the beginning of the 80s in terms of blockchain technologies. That's where we are. We are not in the 90s yet. In the 90s is when the internet exploded in the common consciousness of millions of people in America and Europe. But that is not where we are yet. We are still
But yet the analogy doesn't hold up. Forgive me, but look, today you have 5 billion people using smartphones around the world. Today you have massive companies in the technology space, companies whose market cap exceeds the GDP of most countries on the planet Earth. We're not in the 1970s, where in those days, the number of users was small, the devices themselves were weak, the network couldn't transmit data very fast. The analogy just doesn't hold up. As you said, David, just a few minutes ago, the technology
one
has
of the
evolved.
criticism against blockchain that it cannot transmit enough or cannot hold enough transactions in a given block, and its throughput is too small? You said it. The protocol itself is not mature yet in order to serve the needs and the imagination of its users. It is going to catch up. For example, in Bitcoin, the Lightning Network is a relatively recent technology component in the same protocol, and it is massively increasing the capacity of the Bitcoin network in terms of transactions per second or whatever you want to measure.
Hey guys, I'm mindful of the fact that we're running out of time here. And so I want to wrap up with something a bit more optimistic, because that's what you're like, David. Because I know that, right? It is. Let me ask you this. We do ask this, at the close of the episodes. What is it that excites you about the long future? Over the next 30, 40, 50 years, what is it that really interests you in terms of humanity's development, or a particular element of the future that really excites you personally?
We will have incredible opportunities to profoundly transform ourselves. I was, at the time Robert and I met the president of Humanity Plus, the World Transhumanist Association, and the very definition of transhumanism is the desire and ability of individuals and humanity at large to ask ourselves, what are we? What are we here for? How can we realize our dreams? How can we understand and impact the universe? When we talk about searching for alien civilizations, we ask ourselves, why didn't we hear from them yet? And we don't have an answer to what is called the Fermi paradox of not having detected alien civilizations yet. But in my mind, we are already expanding our impact on the universe with the speed of light in this sphere that is expanding and interacting with the rest of the world in and outside of the solar system. So these opportunities of understanding the impact of technology, of asking whether AI can or should be conscious, whether sharing the world with conscious AIs is possible, how will our world and the rest of the universe change as a consequence? These are incredibly fascinating.
Big picture stuff, man.
For me,
I love it.
When people ask what is the purpose of life, each of us have a subjective experience, what it means to be living. We look out of our skull, and we have these perceptors and sensors with which we can try to decode the universe. And this kilo of matter in our cranium is really a fascinating piece of meat, our brain.
And we're about to take it up a notch because of augmented intelligence.
About it, we are multiplying the number of humans, and if our journey is going to be shared with AIs, and those AIs are going to be conscious, claiming to be, and us will accept their claim, it means that the mass that has awoken in the universe is going to, again, exponentially or joltingly increase. And that is the purpose of life. We are literally waking up the universe. And that is what I am excited about when I think about a future over the course of the next decades or millions of years. We will have people looking back, similarly to how we look back at the Renaissance, and we say, oh my God, can you imagine in those very few decades, Leonardo, Michelangelo.
I know, seriously. We need a new Renaissance, an AI-based Renaissance.
Living together and changing the world. Thousands and millions of years from now, people will look back and ask themselves, can you imagine living in those decades, the first decades of the 21st century, when those things were happening at a daily basis and they were still fuzzy about the meaning of the future, the impact they would have had? They changed the trajectory of the universe.
Wow. What an optimistic note. What a bright note to bring us to a close. Thank you very much. Very much. David, tell us, how can people learn more? People who are looking for a jolt of enthusiasm and maybe some optimism, where can they find out more about David Orban?
I am very easy to find. Just Google my name. The website is davidorban.com. I'm David Orban on Twitter. And you are more than welcome, not only to follow, but also to interact. I love receiving questions. I tend to respond and reply publicly rather than privately. You can, of course, ask not to be named in the answer if you don't want to be identified. But I believe there's a great power in these conversations to happen in the open, just like we are doing now. So I welcome our listeners, to reach out and to follow, of course. I publish a weekly video called The Context that talks about things that catch my attention and have a broader implication. I greatly enjoy interacting with people who gravitate around these themes because we all have different perspectives, but being excited about the implications of technology and how it is shaping our world is what unites us.
Fantastic. Well, that's it for another week of The Futurist. David, thanks for joining us. Robert, thanks again. This week's episode was produced by Kevin Hersham with support from our US-based team, including Elizabeth Severins and Sylvie Johnson and Carlo and the team in the US offices. Please, if you enjoyed the show, leave us a review, 5 stars preferably. Tweet us out. mention us on Facebook, help us spread the word. The show is really getting some enormous traction right now, and that's obviously because of the support that you guys have given us. We will very soon be, not only the top branded futurist show around, but we will be in the top 100, 200 technology shows in this space. So it's fantastic to see the growth coming. So please give us a shout out and let us know what you think of the show. And we will be back next week with more guests on the future. But for now, we will see you
in the future.
Well, that's it for The Futurists this week. If you like the show, we sure hope you did. Please subscribe and share it with the people in your community. And don't forget to leave us a 5-star review. That really helps other people find the show. And you can ping us anytime on Instagram and Twitter at Futurist Podcast for the folks that you'd like to see on the show or the questions that you'd like us to ask. Thanks for joining. And as always, we'll see you in the future.